6:30 or so in the morning, and I'm driving to work. I'm listening to the local radio station as I'm driving in, and the DJ kind of breaks in and says, "Hey, we've got reports that a plane has flown into the one of the Twin Towers." Not too long after that, I got on board a destroyer, the USS Russell, with a team of cryptologists, and we went to the Persian Gulf to support operations there. September 12th was one of the most unified periods in our country's history, I would say. But that was definitely a time where I think the collective nation felt like that we'd been sucker punched, and we don't like being sucker punched in America. So there's this little bit of pressure on you to keep on striving for the next rung of the ladder, which I think is in contrast to this idea of being content, right? So I think you just have to fight for that mindset and work with your spouse to talk through those things about what is it that we really need and what is it that we don't need. The best way to share our faith is just in the way that we set the example as a leader, and the way we treat our people with dignity and respect. If you have opportunities to share faith, that's okay. I mean, obviously, we're told not to proselytize, as it were, in the military, but I think there are many, many better and other ways that you can shine a light into the military culture that make it clear that you are a little bit different. There's something a little bit different about you. People know that by the way you conduct yourself, by the way that you treat them and others. And so I think that is one way that your faith is evident, is in the way that you set the example as a leader.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Faith in the Line of Duty. Today I have the honor of introducing retired Captain Andy Newsome. He's a good friend of mine, so we're just going to hear about his story today in the military. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah. So let's just start from the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I moved around a little bit as a young child because my dad was in the military. I spent most of my childhood in Kentucky. And so that's where my kind of most formative years were.
Nice.
Yeah. And I feel like I was the meme for the, Generation X kids, right? The neighborhood kids that I grew up with were a pack of feral kids, right? So we did all the things that people joke about. We drank from the garden hose. We stayed out till the streetlights came on, and, of course, pre-internet, right? None of that. And so bikes with ramps and no helmets, all the things you talk about. That is exactly how I grew up. And that's exactly what I remember about growing up in Kentucky. I spent a lot of time in the scouting organization. So I came up through Boy Scouts and all that. And so a lot of time camping, a lot of time in the outdoors. So I feel like that was a pretty good time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What do you remember most about your childhood?
Really, like I said, that scouting was a lot because we camped every month, once a weekend, once a month. And so a lot of time outdoors. And so that helped me build the confidence in being outdoors and being outside and enjoying creation too. I think that was an important opportunity.
Why do you think we've kind of shifted towards like technology instead of going outdoors? Like, do you think it's still possible these days?
I think there's actually probably been a resurgence of that since post-COVID, right, when we were all kind of locked up for a little while, and then people kind of came unwound and got back into the outdoors. Obviously, the introduction of the internet, the introduction of things like phones and tablets and all the video gaming systems certainly has captured the attention of a lot of people, but I think there's still a lot of people who want to get outside and enjoy creation too.
That's awesome. So did you grow up in church?
Yeah, I mean, my dad introduced me to the person of Jesus when I was, younger. And then when I was probably 12 or 13, I was at church camp up in Maysville, Kentucky. And that was the first time I had made a public profession of faith in Jesus Christ. And then I was blessed to be part of an awesome youth group at Pleasant Hill Baptist Church there in Somerset, Kentucky. Had a great youth group there, and also was able to do the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in high school. And so that was a pretty formative time as well. So that was good.
Wow. And then were your parents believers as well?
Yeah. I mean, we went to different types of churches as I grew up. I went to Wesleyan churches, went to Baptist churches. And so most of the time was spent in the Southern Baptist kind of system, if you will, when I was a kid.
That's cool. And how important was that, just having a father there for you?
I mean, it was everything, right? Having a dad that kind of teaches you things, he was also kind of an outdoorsman, so he would teach me things that he learned from when he was younger. And so it was supremely important to have a dad there to kind of guide me. And I'm definitely thankful for him. Him and I are terrific friends, even to this day. And so I'm very thankful for everything that he taught me and provided for me as a kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where'd you meet your wife?
So we met while we were going to college. So I went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and she went to a school in Washington College over in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So we met while we were going to college. She was 1 year ahead of me. And so she stayed and waited for me to graduate, and then we got married, and off we went on our Navy adventure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So when did you join the Navy? Right after college?
So I went to the Naval Academy right after high school. And so that kind of puts you on a path to get a commission. And then from then on, did a career after graduating and getting a commission at the Naval Academy.
And then what was your job whenever you joined?
So initially I went to flight school to be a naval flight officer. So I went all the way through flight school, and was originally intending to go be a naval flight officer in E2Cs, which is the Airborne Early Warning Aircraft. And I had a medical problem in the Fleet Replacement Squadron, and so I changed career fields totally to cryptology, was what it was called then, now more commonly known as information warfare, and that's what I did for the entirety of the rest of my career until I retired.
That's awesome. So where all have you been stationed?
We've lived in Norfolk, Virginia a couple times. We lived in Florida. We've lived in San Diego, California, Monterey, California, Japan, Memphis, Tennessee, Fort Meade, Maryland.
Wow.
So we've kind of been all the coasts and then overseas in Japan. Had a great time.
So from what you can tell us, what's like an average day for you in information warfare?
Yeah, that's super hard to describe, one, because of the nature of the work, but also just the types of assignments I had were never the same from duty station to duty station. And so I got an opportunity to learn a broad array of the way the Navy does business, just in the places I was posted. So doing cryptology at sea, learning how it gets done on a broader scale, leading sailors on ships, and then having staff duty in the Pentagon. So kind of a broad array of assignments. So no day was ever the same. I couldn't. Right. It was definitely not Groundhog Day for me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So early on in your career, what was it like going off to college and then starting as an officer, as a believer? Did you face any challenges, or what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, the military obviously has a whole mix of people that have varying faith backgrounds, right? And so that can be a challenge because you come up against different belief sets. But I think if you can still have that grounding in your own personal faith and share that with other people, while at the same time learning what others believe and why they believe it. Being able to lean on your faith in the service helps you to kind of frame your own moral grounding, have your own moral compass, and then it helps you with discernment in the way that you treat other people.
So you have a different lens.
I think that's exactly right, for sure.
Yeah. So you joined right around, you were probably a lieutenant, right? Right around 9/11?
Yeah, so I commissioned in 1998, and of course 9/11, 3 years later. So yeah, I was just about to be, I was a lieutenant at that time. That was interesting. When we were sitting in the graduation seats in 1998, President Clinton was the commencement speaker for that address. When presidents speak at graduation events, it's part motivational speech, part political speech, right? And so he actually underscored the looming threat of radical Islamic terrorism in the late 1990s. And that didn't really resonate so much with us in 1998 because we didn't really kind of understand the full scope there as young people, right? And then 3 years later, 9/11 hits. And so it was kind of prescient for the president to call that out. And it certainly, it underscored our whole generation's experience in the military with Iraq and Afghanistan. So on the morning of 9/11, I was stationed at Naval Security Group Activity San Diego, and I had just gotten there not too long before. And so that morning, I was actually the command duty officer. So the command duty officer is the guy who is representing the commanding officer and helping make sure that the command's kind of daily activities are going the way they're supposed to. So I'm driving to work at Naval Air Station North Island that morning, and it's probably 6:30 or so in the morning, and I'm driving to work. I'm listening to the local radio station as I'm driving in, and the DJ kind of breaks in and says, "Hey, we've got reports that a plane has flown into the one of the Twin Towers." And at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of information, and I think a lot of people may have thought that was probably just like a Cessna. And then, of course, we learned soon thereafter that it was much more deadly than that. And so the base goes to the most stringent force protection condition. Everything's on lockdown, and it was a kind of a very amazing time. And so not too long after that, I got on board a destroyer, the USS Russell, with a team of cryptologists, and we went to the Persian Gulf to support operations there, Operation Enduring Freedom.
And what else did you do that day?
Yeah, so that specific day of 9/11, I'm just trying to get into the naval base. And so when they locked everything down, all the gates shut down. They're inspecting every single vehicle that's coming into the base. And so I was stuck in traffic for nearly 8 hours just waiting to get into the base. Wow. And so thankfully I had the command cell phone and the command roster there with me in my car. So I'm kind of just interfacing with the commanding officer and making phone calls around the command, accounting for our people, making sure we know everybody's at, because you don't know how broad and wide this attack is, because you got the Pentagon, you've got the Trade Center, you got the field in Pennsylvania. You don't know if other military installations are under attack. And so there were a lot of uncertainty, that morning. And so everyone got real clear-eyed real quick about what was going on. So it was a pretty interesting time in a very formative period for my generation of service members.
Wow. I remember as a kid, I remember it happened, but I didn't really, understand the gravity of the situation. And a lot of people say the last time we were unified as a country was during 9/11 is when a lot of people, did you see that?
For sure. September 12th was one of the most unified periods in our country's history, I would say. And we certainly could benefit from some of that unity even today. But that was definitely a time where I think the collective nation felt like that we'd been sucker punched, and we don't like being sucker punched in America. And so the fighting, I think you woke up the fighting spirit of the Americans, and so many people ran to the recruiting stations because they wanted to get in and help and kind of avenge the attack on our country. And so that was a very patriotic time in our country's history.
Wow. So after that, what were some obstacles that you faced as a young lieutenant?
Well, I mean, just the Navy itself can be a challenging, endeavor, because it involves often sea duty, separation from family. And so those kind of things can present challenges. Learning new jobs, all those types of things can certainly present challenges to you. You're put in a leadership, role as a young person, and so you've got to figure out, who am I as a leader? How do I take care of my people? And so a lot of those things present themselves. Plus, you have a career path to manage, right? You have to make sure that you're, getting the right assignments, and if you hope to progress, and make sure you're doing well in that regard. So I think all those things represent pressures and challenges of a young officer's career.
And what would you say is a good, like a tightrope to walk as far as trying to be, go on a good career path, but also not chasing that as well?
I think it's important to do the things that you want to do within your career. And sometimes that may entail risk. It may not be what is considered the golden path. If right. You're trying to be a careerist and rise to a certain level of rank, there may be assignments that put that at risk, but you've got to be comfortable with that. You've got to be at peace with the fact that you're taking the assignments that you want, because it's your career. It's not anyone else's career. Mm-hmm. And so that's the important thing, is to understand where the risk resides and make calculated risks on which assignments you take, and sometimes be content knowing that that may limit your upward mobility in terms of rank.
And so for your wife, how was it difficult on her, like throughout like your relationship and your career? Was there anything that was hard on her, and what did you do to kind of combat that?
Yeah. So for one, Paula is super independent in a great way. Is a fantastic teammate. And so that's the key, I think, is to make sure that you operate as a team, that you operate as partners, and that you're leaning on one another to get things done. I mean, we got married right out of college, and we started having our children right away. And so that in and of itself is a huge stressor. And on top of that, you layer, just got married, just started having kids, 9/11 lights off. I disappear to go on a combat deployment and unsure what that means, how long I'm going to be gone, when I'm going to come back, if I'm going to come back. So those types of things, that's just what we experience. But in the course of anyone's career, you got family separation, you've got, financial struggles as a young family with young children. And I think it's just having that resolve that you're going to work together to get through the challenges together. And I think having Christ at the center of that is key. If you can do that, then you'll be good. So, but like I said, Paula, very independent. And so I felt comfortable that I could go out to sea for months at a time and know that she's got it handled. She's going to build the support structures there back at home and between friends and family and our church homes and just have that tethered support that she needs so that my absence doesn't cause a huge disruption to the relationship.
Right. How many kids do you have?
We have two sons, two young men, very proud of them.
Mm-hmm. How old are they?
Noah is 27 and Will's about to turn 22.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you say would be just like one, like your biggest piece of advice for couples that are military couples?
One piece of advice that we got from a pastor early in my career, he was a pastor, but also a retired naval officer. He told us to try to find our church home before we found the place we were going to reside in for our home in a particular assignment. And we tried really hard to make sure that we did that throughout the course of our career. We would get that next set of orders and we would check out the area and look for churches that were similar to what we were kind of used to and try to find that church and make that as close as we could to where we were going to live at. And I think there were many times that paid off, sometimes harder than others, but I think finding that church home is key because you do develop that support structure when you do that. And so it's much more enriching. It can make a strange place feel much more comfortable when you find a church home right away. And we still have dear friends from all those assignments at places where we made church a priority when we moved around the world.
And so whenever you guys were looking for a church, what were you looking for in a church? Like what made you decide, hey, this is the one I want to go to?
Thankfully, we had the internet to kind of go off of there. A lot of churches now, of course, have websites and you can kind of preview their sermons and see what their ministries are and kind of what the style, if you have a certain stylistic preference. We've tended to enjoy contemporary Christian music. So if a church had that kind of leaning in their praise offering, then that was good. But really, we wanted to hear what they're teaching, understand their core beliefs, make sure that aligned with our beliefs in the Bible, and so that was important. And then proximity to where we thought we would want to be for residents, and then the kids' school systems was a pretty big consideration too. So we tried to overlap all that Venn diagram of all of that together, and sometimes it worked pretty good. So, yeah,
awesome. So one thing that I've noticed that a lot of people in the military struggle with is just contentment. So how do you deal with being content in your job, wherever you're at?
Yeah, that can be a challenge because if you're trying to stay upwardly mobile in the military, there's this constant pressure to strive for the next rank or, the award or whatever it is that is going to make you continue to move up. Because that affords some measure of economic help right there, right? And so also responsibility increases as you increase in rank. So there's this little bit of pressure on you to keep on striving for the next rung of the ladder, which I think is in contrast to this idea of being content, right? So I think you just have to fight for that mindset and work with your spouse to talk through those things about what is it that we really need and what is it that we don't need. And so I think that's probably been easier the older I've gotten to have contentment. I think that just comes with regular maturation. And so that just takes a little bit of time sometimes. Yeah.
So looking back at your career, are there any stories or any memories that just really stick with you?
I mean, certainly the 9/11 was the kind of the formative moment, and then the formative kind of driver for a lot of the things that happened thereafter. I think about the people. I think about the sailors and the Marines and other service members that I've come across in my career, and I think that has been the enduring, memory. Not so much any specific experience, though there have been duty stations that we've absolutely loved. But the people, many of whom I'm still in contact with today, dear friends, just absolutely dear friends. Some of the greatest Americans that I've ever come across have been through the course of my military career. And so I'm very thankful for that.
Mm-hmm. And have you been able to find like other officers in the military that you've been able to connect with, like through your relationship with Christ?
100%. And I think that has been a huge blessing to me, is that I felt like God specifically put other believers in close proximity to me to help sustain me when times were tough. I can close my eyes and see the people and think of their names today, of people who I know who are believers in Jesus Christ, and they were near me in our place of work. And that is a huge, huge blessing. I can't overstate it. Very cool. So when you can shine that light in the workplace, any workplace, whether it be military or not, I think you may underestimate how uplifting you can be to other people, but and I think that's definitely a huge benefit. So I definitely have those people that were put in my path that I'm very thankful for.
Another question I'd like to ask is can you share your faith in the military? And I think it's a little bit unique for you just as an officer and as a person in a position of leadership. So how do you do that?
I think the best way to share our faith is just in the way that we set the example as a leader, and the way we treat our people with dignity and respect. If you have opportunities to share faith, that's okay. I mean, obviously we're told not to proselytize, as it were, in the military, but I think there are many, many better and other ways that you can shine a light into the military culture that make it clear that you are a little bit different. There's something a little bit different about you. People know that by the way you conduct yourself, by the way that you treat them and others. And so I think that is one way that your faith is evident, is in the way that you set the example as a leader.
So when was the first time you were in a position kind of similar to like a squadron commander, where you had a lot of people under you and then you had to, choose whether or not to give punishment or be lenient? Like, when was the first time you had to do that?
Yeah, so in 2015, I took command of the Information Warfare Training Command in Monterey, California. So about 600 people total, sailors and civilians. And these sailors are fresh out of boot camp. They're attending the Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center to learn a foreign language for a specific purpose in the military. And so they're fresh out of boot camp. They're the newest sailors, that we have. And so that was a huge opportunity for me, but also a huge responsibility, because I was the first commanding officer that they really came in contact with in the course of their career. And so I felt very strongly that I wanted to set a supremely good example for every commanding officer that they would have after that, right? And so, as you can imagine, when you have 600 or so 18-year-olds, they're going to find creative ways to get themselves in trouble. And so there were definitely times when I had to administer non-judicial punishment as part of being the commanding officer. And I think what I was able to do as I considered each case that came before me was think about, you think about the word discipline, you think about the word justice, you think about the word mercy, and you think about the words grace. And when you have a faith-based lens, it helps the way you think about those things, and it helps you kind of discern how you're going to handle those cases. And certainly there were instances where you were able to extend mercy, which is to not give someone something that they deserve to get in terms of punishment, and grace, of course, being giving something to someone that they don't deserve. So when you understand how grace works with you and your faith, it helps you to extend grace to other people. So that was on full display as I tried to maintain good order and discipline as a commanding officer. I often relied on my chain of command to help give me recommendations on how to dispose of certain cases. And so I think that was a great opportunity for me to practice my muscles in terms of justice and mercy and grace. So it was definitely a very helpful time for me as a leader.
Yeah. So throughout your career, was there any times where the Lord was really evident, like throughout your career?
I'd like to think that the fact that Paula and I were intentional about trying to keep Christ at the center of our marriage, and also to make sure that we tried to stay connected to the body of believers everywhere that we moved, I think that helped to make him evident in both our marriage, our lives, and then throughout my career.
And what about your kids? Was there anything that they struggled with, throughout your military career?
I think most military kids would say that we moved probably 12 times in the course of my career, and that is super disruptive. And I know there were times when we ripped our kids out of schools and had them show up in a new neighborhood. And so the moves, I think, are super disruptive and can be challenging in terms of making new friends, learning a new school system, and, their, different systems. And so that, I think that is probably something that they would say was challenging, was moving around. But our family unit is pretty tight. And so the four of us became very close throughout the course of all that time. Because, like I said, we started having kids right away, and they were with us the whole time throughout my career. And so they got to see it from nearly the beginning to the very end when I retired a couple years ago.
So as I go here in the next couple months for officer training school, what would be one piece of advice you'd give me as I commission?
Certainly take care of your people, right? And then the other thing I think I would say is just lead as your authentic self. Don't fall into the trap of thinking there's any preconceived notion about what an officer has to be, or what, anyone in your particular career field or something has to be. You're Daniel Johnson, right? And so that's how you need to lead. So lead with a sense of authenticity, because your subordinates will detect that and they'll appreciate that. If you're not an authentic leader, then you'll be less effective, I think, as a leader.
So after that command position in California, where did you go after that?
So after that, I went to the Pentagon, and I spent the last 6 years of my career actually at the Pentagon, first in the kind of the budget shop, and then in the digital warfare office, which was my last assignment before I left active duty.
Big building. I think it's the largest office building in the world.
It's huge, but you know what? And a lot of people, it's fascinating because having now been there for so long, and I hear people kind of almost brag about how they avoided the Pentagon for their whole career. The actual building is very cool. Like, it's a cool building just inside. They've done upgrades to it inside. And so it's almost like walking into a museum every day, because there's all kinds of display cases with fantastic kind of memorabilia inside. And that's throughout the whole building. And so the building itself is cool. The work inside can be challenging, but it's good work in defense of the country. And so I don't begrudge the time that I spent in there. I made great friends there. I still have people that I stay in contact with. I still go to the Pentagon from time to time. And so it was very interesting. It was very educational for me, I will say, because you learn how the Department of War does kind of the business side of preparing for the defense of the nation. Yeah.
And so at what point did you decide to get out of the military?
It was probably the tour right before the last one at the digital warfare office, because you have to make a choice. And at some point in time, you have to make a choice. And I advise folks to understand what you and your family's career and family red lines are with respect to a military career, and hold true to those red lines. And what I mean by that is, if there's a specific assignment that you're like, I'm just not going to do that. That's not good for me and my family. That is the red line. I think I started to see one of those red lines approaching. And so that was a time when it was, Paul and I talked, and I was like, it's time to transition. And so it's time to go. So probably right before I went to the digital warfare office, I, requested to retire, and did that after 26 years of commissioned service.
Wow. And so what's a good way to prepare to get out? And then how did you deal with the transition out? Was it difficult for you?
It was made less difficult because I had a very good friend who was actually, there were multiple people who were in the kind of the same spot I was. And that's not uncommon at the Pentagon for people to retire from there. And so we formed a group that kind of got together on a regular basis and had lunch together and would compare notes. Patrick Kulikowski wrote NavyRetirementGuide.com and put this guide out there, and we kind of made that our checklist. And so I still share that with other people who I know are getting out, because it's very, very comprehensive. And I think he just kind of got tired of the lack of information that being consolidated in one spot. And he wrote a pretty comprehensive guide about how to actually administratively get out of the military, specifically the Navy, but I think it has a lot of applicability. But we would use that kind of binder with the checklist in it. The guys and I would get together and have lunch and compare notes and say, don't forget about this, don't forget about that. But to your question of, how do you prepare? You do have to prepare. And what I mean by that is a couple of years ahead of time, you need to start making your plan, I think, and start understanding what you want to do. I guess I would say to anyone who's coming right behind me, you don't have to have it all figured out before you step off into retirement. You just don't. It's unrealistic. So just relax, find people to compare notes with, and it's going to be fine.
Do you miss it?
There are days when I definitely miss it. There are more days than not that I'm like, I made the right decision. The good news is I still work for the Department of the Navy as a federal civilian, so I'm still in and among the military culture every single day. So that eases the transition a little bit, because I'm still kind of doing the business.
Right. I hear that's much nicer.
Yeah, it is good. There's goodness to it. But there are days when I see, ships at sea and stuff like that, and you kind of remember how cool it was to do that kind of stuff. So I don't regret it. I had a great ride. I was able to do everything kind of I wanted. We lived all over the world, and I've been able to fly airplanes and drive ships and live around the country and around overseas. So it was a great career.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So looking back, what would you say would be a high moment of your career and a low moment of your career? Some
of the staff duty can be low. I wouldn't point to one in particular, but just in general, that can be a grind.
What is staff duty?
You're just kind of, you're on either a numbered fleet staff or, you're at a headquarters is probably the most layman's way to put it. You're at a headquarters element and you're just kind of doing office work every day. And that can be a little less fulfilling than, going out to sea and doing stuff like that. So some of the staff duty can be kind of low. The high point for me, without a doubt, was being in command in Monterey, because I loved getting the energy from my sailors. I loved, taking care of my sailors and watching them progress in their careers, and achieve things and having a small part in their career success. So that, to me, plus the location was in Monterey, California, which is beautiful. And so Paul and I really enjoyed living there, and I love being a commanding officer out there. I just love being a commanding officer, period. It was a good time.
And yeah, so as an officer, you get to do a lot of cool things like giving people awards and re-enlistments and all that. Do you remember your first re-enlistment you did?
Yikes, I did a lot. So I don't remember the first person I was able to do that for, but I was able to do a lot of re-enlistments, a lot of advancements, recommend people to go to places like the Naval Academy, other opportunities, write letters of recommendation. So it was definitely, sometimes you feel like the mayor, because you get to pin the medals on and really just, it's really neat to be able to recognize your sailors for their achievements. It's awesome.
Did you memorize the oath?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel like the first time, if I were to do it, I don't know, I'd have to really say it over and over again.
Yeah. It's not that hard. If you do it enough, you just got to commit it to memory. It's one of those little things that, certainly maybe at first I had to use an index card, but I don't know if I did in public, but you 100% have to memorize the oath. It's just that little icing on the cake because people want to know that you put the preparation into that special moment, right? So I think that's important. So for anybody out there who's having to administer the oath, just memorize that thing. Okay. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, so for Paula, you said that she was independent, but is that something that she had to learn, or is that something she was natural at, or?
No, I think that is who she is. That's who she is as a person. So when we were dating, I kind of explained to her, like, I'm getting ready to do this Navy life. And that means moving a lot. It means being gone a lot and coming back and forth. And she was all in from day one, chips all across the table. And so we just kind of hand in hand just walked through that with each other. And so, like I said, I knew that I could go out to sea, and she had it handled. She was able to manage the home and raise our kids and do all that. And so, and some of that was still pre-internet time, right? So it was maybe the sparse email early on or snail mail letters. But then as time went on, of course, we had, phones and internet. So that made it a little bit easier to stay connected for sure. But yeah, that's just who Paula is. She's an independent person, which was super helpful for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what is your future looking like now? I know you said you're still in a federal job, but what's the future looking like for you?
I think it's TBD, and I'm open to stuff, so I haven't really charted. I told myself when I retired that I wanted to stop trying to reach for the next rung of any particular ladder. Because that took a lot of pressure off me, and I'm not trying to make a next rank or anything like that. And so that's a little bit freeing. Right. So, but I haven't made my next long-term plan yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So as military people or military members move, what's a good way for them to get connected in the church and start using their spiritual gifts?
Well, I think, most churches have some sort of kind of like orientation course. I think ours has the discipleship pathway that kind of talks about, here's the core beliefs of our church. Here's ways that you can serve. And then maybe even some of them would administer some sort of survey to determine what may be the ways that you're gifted. And so that's a way is to kind of, right away kind of figure out what that church is up to and find ways to serve and that fill gaps that the church may have. I think that's a key way.
So how do you deal with interpersonal conflicts in the workplace?
I think one of the keys is to maintain dignity and respect. I think another is to underreact to everything. So if you can underreact and then remember, Pastor Steve one time said that you'll never meet another person that Jesus didn't die for. When he said that, that punched me right in the stomach. And that changes the way that you look at people. It changes the way that you treat people. And it can certainly help change the way that you deal with conflict. I was listening to the Look and Sound of Leadership podcast, and the speaker brought up this framework called the conflict house. And so there are 3 rooms in the conflict house. You can go into any of the rooms that you want, but you have to go through all the rooms before you leave. And so the rooms are what happened, feelings, and identity. And so if you examine all of those things as part of a conflict, you may have a path to resolution. And it may not be in one conversation, but that's a framework that I thought was helpful to try to deal with conflict. But again, if we just look at everyone as image bearers and we think about that as the way that we deal with them, that can change the way that we deal with them in terms of managing conflict as well.
Wow. I like that. That's cool. Yeah. So just in closing, why should someone follow Jesus?
I think having that friendship is so vital, especially when times in this world get really tough through loss, through so many things. Having that reliance on Jesus is so important. And again, I think having that faith in Christ has changed the way that I view and deal with other people, with my family, with friends, and people you may not even know. So I think that's super important. So Jesus has definitely been a key aspect of my relationships, with Paula and me. And that's been with my children and my extended family. So I encourage everyone to kind of look into it and make that decision for themselves. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on here. I
Yeah.
had a great talk with you. A lot of the
Same.
stuff that you said is going to be very beneficial for everyone here.
Thanks for
I
having
appreciate
me.
it.
Yeah.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of Faith in the Line of Duty. If you're a first responder or in the military and have a story you'd like to share, email me at faithinthelineofduty@gmail.com. You could be a guest on a future episode. To continue the conversation, visit my Facebook and Instagram page. Thanks again for tuning in, and join me next time for another encouraging story of faith in the line of duty.